In the virtue of prudence, the ring of the active life is rounded out and closed, is completed and perfected. For man, drawing on his experience of reality, acts in and upon reality, thus realizing himself in decision and in act. The profundity of this concept is expressed in the strange statement of Thomas Aquinas that in prudence, the commanding virtue of the conduct of life, the happiness of active life is essentially comprised. Prudence is that illumination of moral existence, which, according to one of the wisest books of the East, is a thing denied to every man who looks at himself. That quote is from Josef Pieper's work, The Four Cardinal Virtues. In it, he makes a bold claim that the virtue of prudence is the red-hot core, the keystone of the moral life. In the face of contemporary relativism, utilitarianism, or even outright moral despair, is such a claim really justified, or is it the faint, dying echo of an ancient fantasy? In this video, we'll explore and defend his viewpoint, and beyond that, we'll break down how you can distinguish false prudence from real prudence in your life. So what is prudence? Why does it even make sense to speak about it today? First, it's important to know that it is considered a virtue in the classical Western philosophical tradition, and Pieper provides a wonderful quote explaining what is meant by virtue, writing, "Virtue is a perfected ability of man as a spiritual person, and justice, fortitude, and temperance as abilities of the whole man achieve their perfection only when they are founded upon prudence, that is to say, upon the perfected ability to make right decisions. Only by means of this perfected ability to make good choices are instinctive inclinations toward goodness exalted into the spiritual core of man's decisions, from which truly human acts arise. Prudence is needed if man is to carry through his impulses and instincts for right acting, if he is to purify his naturally good predispositions and make them into real virtue, that is, into the truly human mode of perfected ability. In other words, virtues are the perfection of the human person, the realization of potential into actuality. The cardinal virtues of prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance were traditionally considered the most important virtues, and of them, prudence was considered the highest, because it is the perfection of making good decision, and thus speaks most immediately to the perfection of human freedom. We actually cover this topic in another video, the relationship prudence has to other virtues, which I'll link below. But for now, I'll provide one other excellent quote from Pieper, expanding on this. Thus, prudence is cause, root, mother, measure, precept, guide, and prototype of all ethical virtues. It acts in all of them, perfecting them to their true nature. All participate in it, and by virtue of this participation, they are virtues. Interestingly, and importantly, this is not merely objective, meaning it concerns the world outside of us, but it is also subjective. That means it shapes who we are and our inward self-experience. Pieper explains, "The intrinsic goodness of man, and that is the same as saying his true humanness, consists in this, that reason perfected in the cognition of truth shall inwardly shape and imprint his volition and action." Clearly, reason plays a key role in our happiness. We could even say it is the key to dynamic pursuit of the infinite by the finite human creature. Now that we've laid the groundwork and can see the human person as a rational creature, whose well-being consists in the active rational response to reality, we can begin to flesh out what false prudence is and the danger it holds. In what might be surprising to some, Pieper spends a good deal of his time in his book, The Four Cardinal Virtues, critiquing excessive rigidity in the moral life. In particular, he critiques casuistry, which is the attempt to solve moral dilemmas systematically in an academic setting. While it is deeply rooted in the Western moral tradition, it reached its peak a few hundred years ago under the influence of Jesuit theologians, and today it doesn't have the best reputation. As Pieper puts it, out of the very human desire to secure and comprehend, to determine, limit, and fix precisely, there arose almost of necessity man's efforts to order the limitless variety of modes for achieving the good, to render it surveyable by the longitude and latitudes of abstract rational measurement. His concern here is the attempt to replace a virtue, prudence, which is dynamic and personal, with a textbook. The latter approach risks infantilizing the human person. It's like providing a fish instead of teaching people to fish. At its worst, it allows people to deactivate their consciences, which need to be developed, and to attempt to replace them with an answer book. Pieper, for example, compares it to a young doctor mistaking anatomical models for a living body. Life must be lived, and when faced with a dilemma in real time, we cannot hit a pause button and Google the answer. At the same time, Pieper himself calls casuistry a highly useful and probably necessary aid. After all, as a Christian, Pieper affirms absolute norms like the Ten Commandments and the Beatitudes. However, those absolute norms are general, and specific answers to specific questions require a particular person in a concrete circumstance to be actively prudent. It is impossible always to know right and wrong beforehand. This isn't to say we shouldn't study morality or ethics. Actually, quite the opposite. True human education is desperately needed in order to educate people how to realize their true human potential. As Pieper writes, the virtue of prudence, being the perfected ability to make decisions in accordance with reality, is the quintessence of ethical maturity, of which, of course, teachability is a great component. And the preeminence of prudence over justice, fortitude, and temperance means simply that without maturity, truly moral life and action is not possible. If then prudence is truly the mold and mother of all moral virtue, then it is likewise true that it is impossible to educate a person to justice, fortitude, and temperance without first and simultaneously educating him to prudence. And education to prudence means objective estimation of the concrete situation of concrete activity, and to the ability to transform this cognition of reality into concrete decision. The classical Christian doctrine of the preeminence of the virtue of prudence is essentially opposed to all falsifying, moralistic, or casuistic regimentation of the person who is called upon to make decisions. The first of the cardinal virtues is not only the quintessence of ethical maturity, but in so being is also the quintessence of moral freedom. In other words, real prudence requires education that goes beyond simply giving answers in a book to moral dilemmas. Another related danger to an excessively academic approach to prudence is ending up focused on what is wrong more than focusing on what is right, because often it is easier to know what is wrong than what is right. As Pieper explains, a moral theology which relies too much on casuistry necessarily becomes a science of sins instead of a doctrine of virtues, or a theory of the Christian idea of man. It soon becomes reduced to an endless determining of the boundary beyond which sins are mortal and this side of which sins are venal. If a casuistic doctrine of sin is combined with the moralism of isolated observances and abstentions, and it is indeed akin to this moralism, there arises that phenomenon, which was, after all, not completely invented by Nietzsche, of a rather vindictive and insubstantial naysaying, which serves at best to prey upon the consciences of the immature, but is of no use as a standard for real life. If we spend all our time focused on injustice and sin, we can end up simply trying to figure out how much we can get away with, or alternatively, obsessing over every minor mistake. Instead, we should focus more on virtue rather than on vice. We should be more concerned with how to do good than how to avoid evil. Pieper ultimately cites St. Augustine, who says that for the truly wise, the one rule of life is along the lines of have love and do what you will. Pieper's critique of casuistry reveals a central point about prudence. It is fundamentally dynamic. Ethics and moral studies are critically helpful, but right and wrong exist in concrete situations, and oftentimes there are critical details in real life that determine how we should act. Even in Christianity, destruction of property and physical intimidation is generally not good. Yet we can think of Jesus cleansing the temple as an example when circumstances gave rise to a completely surprising good deed, one that we would not have thought of beforehand unless we were truly wise. As Pieper writes, the immediate criterion for concrete ethical action is solely the imperative of prudence in the person who has the decision to make. This standard cannot be abstractly construed or even calculated in advance. Abstractly here means outside the particular situation. The imperative of prudence is always and in essence a decision regarding an action to be performed in the here and now. By their very nature, such decisions can be made only by the person confronted with the decision. No one can be deputized to make them. No one else can make them in his stead. Similarly, no one can be deputized to take the responsibility. which is the inseparable companion of decision. No one else can assume this burden. The strict specificity of ethical action is perceptible only to the living experience of the person required to decide. He alone has access to the totality of singularia circa quae sunt operationes, that is to say, the totality of concrete realities which surround the concrete action, to the state of the person himself and the condition of the here and the now. It is exclusively the business of prudence to form a right judgment concerning individual acts, exactly as they are to be done here and now. There is no way of grasping the concreteness of a man's ethical decisions from outside. In short, the complexity of the moral life means we cannot rely on rigid formulas or casuistry to resolve every situation. The world is richly varied, full of innumerable possibilities and unique circumstances, and this very diversity makes it impractical, if not impossible, to always have prepared fixed absolute rules that apply universally at every level. Absolute general norms absolutely exist, and they always guide us. But when it comes to concrete decisions, especially in thoughts and intentions, things are really so clear-cut. Some choices are obviously wrong, yet many situations resist easy classification. This is precisely why prudence is essential. It equips us to navigate the real world with sober evaluation, rather than clinging to prematurely fixed judgments. Prudence acknowledges both the norm and the circumstance, harmonizing them in light of reason and reality. Without prudence, morality collapses either into rigidity, where rules are applied blindly, or into relativism, where rules are abandoned altogether. Thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. In it, we saw that both education is critical to the development of prudence, and yet more than mere education is needed to become truly prudent. It is the perfection of the ability to make good decisions in concrete circumstances. This was definitely not an exhaustive treatment. I put an Amazon affiliate link to the book I used in creating this video below, in case you're interested in exploring further, and there are many other good resources you can use yourself to delve further into this topic. After all that, I would like to revisit our opening quote and see how much more it makes sense. In the virtue of prudence, the ring of the active life is rounded out and closed, is completed and perfected. For man, drawn on his experience of reality, acts in and upon reality, thus realizing himself in decision and in act. The profundity of this concept is expressed in the strange statement of Thomas Aquinas that in prudence, the commanding virtue of the conduct of life, the happiness of active life is essentially comprised. Prudence is that illumination of moral existence which, according to one of the wisest books of the East, is a thing denied to every man who looks at himself.